Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mindshift podcast, episode 1, called Let's Get Mystical. I am John Mays, and with me, as always, is the lovely, talented German. This is where you
Philip
say
Zimmerman.
Yeah.
No, I was just in awe of your radio voice here for a second. So keep talking.
Yeah, sorry, I got into DJ mode. Hey, here at the top of the hour, we're going to be playing some great hits from the Rolling Stones. All right. Hey, everybody, thanks for hanging out with us today. We're talking today about getting mystical. We want to introduce you to the idea of the importance of mystical spirituality in today's world. I know, at least here in the U.S., particularly in Christian cultures, mystical, it just that word itself, like there are probably a handful of people that have already turned this off, just based upon the title of that. Yeah, it carries some pretty significant baggage at times. A lot of times people think of mystical as in occult practices, Enneagram, anything that is, it's kind of that whole the Gnosticism, the separation of spirit and body. Like now you're dealing in the spirit world, and that's not a good thing, and that's actually not part of our Christian traditions. And so I'd love for you just to kind of speak into, like, actually, what is the definition? Your definition of what it means to be a mystic.
Okay, I should have looked that up, so I give you the correct answer, because I would.
That's why I said your definition.
That's good. It's my definition. So basically, and mysticism and mystics we find in all kinds of world religions. It's not just typical for us as Christians. I will speak from a Christian perspective, but it's very interesting because if you study the different mystics, which I have not studied all of them, but I've studied quite a few also from other religions, it's almost like they're all meeting on the mystical level again, which freaks some people out, and maybe that's also part of why this is a problem. But from a Christian perspective, basically, it's focus. It's the Christian focus on being in the presence and feeling the presence of God through an intimate relationship, with actually the goal of being spiritual transformation. It's for me knowing while you don't know. So a mystic knows by not knowing, and that already sounds like you don't know what you're talking about. But actually, there's a Christian tradition in that you can have such a deep relationship with God, where it's not just about knowing all the right answers and hearing the voice of God, or feeling goosebumps when you are singing a song, or when you feel like Jesus is your boyfriend. None of that. It's a much deeper sense of knowing that you and God are in union and that you are one. Even in times of the dark night of the soul, when you feel like God is not there, that there is somehow the sense that even though you don't know, which, when it comes to Mindshift, is just a beautiful foundation of actually engaging in the conversation. And there is a long tradition, even with some of our great theologians. Thomas of Aquinas, at the end of his life, he actually went silent. He had a mystical experience, and he went silent because he was afraid, because he felt like this is the guy who kind of wrote the big works on theology, and he said, I have nothing more to say, because what I've experienced, what I've sensed there with God is so much more, and it's so much more beautiful that basically there's nothing I want to add in writing. It would just not be adequate. So for me, that's basically what a mystic is. It's this pursuit of that intimate relationship with Christ that you have. But I want to paraphrase, and not paraphrase, but I just want to add, it's not just that you kind of become this guy who hears the voice of God all day long. I get a little scared of people who tell me, they heard from God, and this is your message. That's not what it is about. It's a much deeper knowing of you being in union and being one with God.
Yeah, I like that. It's always funny to me how the idea of the mystical is so kind of like taboo and scary inside of kind of Western church sometimes, because it's like our faith is built upon the belief that a virgin got pregnant and a man lived like legitimately the most perfect life ever, walked on water, could multiply material goods with just the touch of his hands, and didn't start a Fortune 500 company, was murdered, and then just like came back from the dead 3 days later, and now actually lives inside of us. And yet we say we're not mystical. You can't whiteboard that out, right? You just can't do it. Like there's a tension there that you just have to believe, because you just can't know those things. Like you can know them in your gut, right? Where it's like, this is the truer truth for me. But you can't know it as like, well, this is how a virgin gets pregnant. And this is how the Spirit comes to reside in you. It lives right here in your left aorta. Like you just can't whiteboard it out. It's not linear. So technically, just being someone who follows Jesus, being a Christian, you are like, I don't know what else to tell you. Like you're a mystic.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of freedom that comes with it, because a mystic does not need to defend his belief system or his faith, because he's in such a deep place that he just knows. So it's like you arguing to me that, Philip, no, you are not married. Your wife doesn't exist. And I would be like, you can argue all you want, and I might not be the perfect one explaining my wife, and I would not be the one who actually can show you the picture, because I don't have a picture with me right now. But I know that I'm married, and that I have this deep, intimate relationship. And that all of a sudden, when you walk with God, so my experience walking with people also through different stages of their faith, that often sometimes in the beginning when you become a Christian, you get more direction from God. So you hear sometimes, this is right or this is wrong. God kind of all of a sudden the Spirit is convicting you, and some things seem very black and white to you. But as you grow older in your faith, all of a sudden it's like, some people, and that's where people also don't know what to do with it, because they feel like, now I'm not hearing so much about a voice from God. Now I don't know. In the beginning, it was all exciting, and I heard more things. And I normally try to explain it as like, yes, when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I called my mom when I needed something, and she explained it to me, and she gave me lists on what I need to shop in the grocery if she would, ask me to do the shopping or whatever. That now, with 40, if I would still call my mom and say, hey, what should I do today? When should I get up? What clothes should I be wearing today? It would be a little bit strange, because my mom wants that I'm actually an individual who makes my own decisions in the spirit of hopefully what she gave to me. And still, because of the relationship we have, I have the highest respect. If she would ever tell me to do something, I would do it, not because she has the power over me, but because she has the authority that came through just a self-sacrificial love over the years of actually me, raising me. And so with God, it's kind of the same thing. Sometimes we have these moments, yes, where it's very clear, but this is, the Christian life is so much more and so much deeper than just these great expressions and these emotional highs that we sometimes are seeking.
That's good. I think a lot of times when I think mystical, when I think it's the nonverbal, right? I think we rely so heavily on our verbal communication, on written communication, on the written text. And that's not to dismiss any of those things. But you can be the best poet in the world. You cannot adequately express in words the way you feel when you look into the eyes of your daughter. Just can't. Like, words will fall short every single time. And so there's this, and we all know this. Every culture knows that there are just things that we just can't adequately explain through words. And because we can't explain them through words, I actually don't think we can experience them fully through words. And so, showing up and being a part of a healthy church community, and being taught sound biblical teachings every weekend is a good thing. But I would argue and suggest that it's still incomplete. Like, there are things, this is where we talk about in the kingdom, there are these experiences that we tend to miss. And so maybe another way to look at the difference is like a mystic, or being mystical, is looking for God and expecting God anywhere and everywhere, in anyone and everyone, all the time, and not kind of thinking like, well, there are these places that God exists, and that looks like my small group, that looks like my church service, that looks like praying before meals and bedtimes. But it's like, actually, God, I have a sneaky suspicion that God is everywhere and doing things that I perceive and don't perceive, and really kind of developing the eye to see those things, so that when you see them, you can actually participate in them. So what would you say to that?
I think that is very astute in the sense, like, we all need a kind of basically a frame, and so that's why I also believe in spiritual disciplines, like meeting with Christians and engaging in listening to sermons, all of the necessary things. It's like, I go back to dating. Yes, you need these date nights, so to speak. You need to have that in your structure, or it will not happen. But then you also need to live your life with your partner, and so together we can live life with God, even in the ordinary and even in the everyday, and hopefully, that's why Jesus kind of said, you need to have eyes to see and ears to hear, because God is all at work all over the place. This world is basically so trenched with I don't know if that's the right word, but basically soaked up with the presence of God. And it's just a matter of us basically calling it out, experiencing it, and having the eyes to see and the ears to hear. The German theologian Karl Rahner, he said at some point that in the days ahead, and I don't know exactly when he was, but many years back, he said, you will either be a mystic or nothing at all. And for him, a mystic was one who is really experiencing God for real, because especially in the German context, the question before is, do you want to follow Jesus? Is there even a Jesus? Is there a God? It's not about following God. That's kind of the American question. It's like, hey, do you want to follow God? And people go like, no, I don't. And in Germany, it's like, oh, I first need to solve that question. Is there a God or is there not a God? If I can't experience him, then I will not even think of following him. So my first prayer that I have with people when we are in conversation, I kind of put it all on the line and say, you know what? Let's pray and open ourselves up to there is a hunch in you that this might be true. And that is true for almost anybody I talk to, even the most greatest atheist I can ask, have you experienced something that you can't explain in words? And they all have a story or an example. And I'm like, maybe this is God. Maybe if you just now opening up yourself for God to actually, for you to experience him, would be wanting to follow him. And then we basically pray, and I poop my pants, so to speak, because I say God will show up in this moment, and you will have an experience and an encounter. So even for the people who are listening, if you don't know if there is a God, I became a Christian because I read the verse, if you seek God with all your heart, you will find him. Mm. And as a very humble German, I said, God, you have 2 weeks. And if I find you, I will follow you with the rest of my life. I said, I can't find you, but I can seek you for 2 weeks. And I I sought him. I for 2 weeks, I was like, okay, I'm more on the productivity side. I want to get things done. So I thought, God, you have 2 weeks. If you don't show up, if I ever stand in front of you, I can say, you know what, God, I gave you 2 weeks. And you didn't do anything. I would do it more humble now, knowing about God than than that. But I basically gave him this chance, and this is what we can. And then God can show up, and God needs to show up, because if He doesn't show, if you don't experience this, it's all empty. And this is especially coming from a postmodern, post-Christian context, because people they don't just follow because because they grew up in a Christian nation or in a Christian family or whatever, as if you can have a Christian nation or a Christian family.
Yeah. Oh man, that's it's so interesting that you bring that up. Like, it's the same story. Like for me, it was it is just that hunch. Like even that is this mystical piece, right? That you're like, I would have, when I showed up first to church, I would have like said 100% that I was agnostic and I was trying really hard to be an atheist. Yet I can remember standing in my driveway in Summit Place as a 6 foot, like sixth grader who looked like Bambi on ice, could not walk and chew gum at the same time, and being so mad at God, like literally cursing God because I couldn't hit a jump shot, right? You don't argue and get angry with things that you don't like at some level.
With the Santa Claus? You didn't get angry at the Santa Claus?
Yeah, it just doesn't happen. You just know that there's this, like, there's more to it, right? And I think that's kind of the beauty.
Yeah, one way of how I explain it to people when they don't have any faith background, I tell them, God and the life with God, it's like this amazing song that you are hearing and you just want to dance. Now, I would show you how I dance, but that would just break the internet. So I don't. But it's like this amazing song, and you have listened and you have experienced some tunes. You have maybe one instrument. You don't hear the whole song, but you can hinge. You kind of know that there is more to life, and we all have that in us. That is the part of the human experience. We are more, than man lives by bread and not by bread alone, Jesus said, and women too. We don't live by bread alone. There is more to this.
Yeah. So how did I've got some thoughts, but I think for a lot of folks that are maybe engaging with us, and at least I know the people that I am in conversations with, like this idea of mysticism, it is new. Like when you say it, they're like, yeah, but it feels so foreign to their spiritual walk, right? To their spiritual formation, to their next step, the things that they've been led to do that will, produce good fruit in their lives. And so how do you think do you have a take on how we got here? Like how these things kind of became divorced from one another in Western church?
Well, I think that sometimes, especially the Western way, is we want to have 3 points, 3 action steps, the fill in the blank kind of Christianity, and I'm not all against it. When I teach, sometimes I use fill in the blank. Sometimes I kind of let's go through the structure, but it's just the first level. So when I teach my daughter, want to teach her something, I need to break it down. I don't need to make it too complex because she's just too young to understand the whole piece. So it's helpful, but often we got stuck there. And then all of a sudden, when we are evolving and we start to question things, and also I introduce some more practices. We have not talked about that, but there's some contemplative practices that are just more aligned with kind of the mystical life. That people kind of know. Oh, I don't really know how to place that and where to go. For me, maybe it's a good place to kind of tell you the story of why I ended there, because for me it has a lot to do with my motivation of why I actually became kind of a mystic. So I became a Christian. I became really on fire for God. So I decided, I need to go to Bible school, and I was in Bible school in my third year, and studied theology all day long. And I got very, very sick. I don't know even, John, if I ever told you that story, but I got very sick. And the doctors, I called the doctor. He looked at me and I said, you just have a kind of a flu. Don't worry too much. Now, I got so bad, I had called them the next day. He called the ambulance to take me, actually to rush me to the hospital, to intensive care. And I was in intensive care, and all my organs were dropping by the hour with getting worse. So much so that actually all of a sudden my dad, my mom, and even my brother came from Germany to visit me, because they were the doctor said that this might be the last chance you will see your son. I was in such tremendous pain, and they couldn't figure out what I lost 20 pounds in 5 days. And I was already not the heavyweight. So people came into the room and were literally scared of when they saw me. I was in such a tremendous pain that I couldn't walk, I couldn't move anymore. They had to give me water so that I wouldn't dry out. And they asked my parents, if Philip maybe is using drugs, because all the painkillers is not helping. And they just said, before you went to Bible college, everything was great. We don't know what happened at the Bible college, but
they got the best drugs in Bible college.
Well, that's another episode. But basically, I was in such a tremendous pain that I told my dad, or that I actually wanted to die. And not because I'm so brave. It's like I am a sissy, and I just wanted to be done with the pain. But I remember James chapter 4, where, we read in the scripture that if somebody's sick among you, get the elders and lay hands on them and let them have, pray for you. So my dad would get all these elders from the Bible school. He wanted to make sure he gets for his only son, he gets kind of the best elders to pray. And then it says in the Bible verse that they need to confess their sins. You need to confess your sins before you before you pray. So he took them all into the hospital chapel and said, guys, now you need to confess your sins. And I wish I would have been there, hearing my professors confess their sins. Well, they came and they prayed for me that night, and the next morning I was healed, and I left intensive care that day, and 2 days later I left the hospital. I could hardly walk. The doctors that looked at me afterwards and saw the results, they said, "We've never seen something like this. We've seen this in the books, in the medical books, but we've never had somebody actually walk into the door with this kind of a record." So now we can talk about miracles and all of that at another episode. But for me, it was very clear that when I walked out of there, and I mean, it's the most beautiful feeling after being in such tremendous pain. It's like, you had a bad flu and you start feeling better and you just sense everything being more alive. And I felt like, man, the sky is bluer, the air, you feel it. I mean, it's you're oversensitized or sensitive to different things. Well, I contemplated and said, you know what, this truly was a miracle. And I was on the trajectory to be a very good pastor, Christian. I studied theology, so I knew that even good people disagree on topics. And I said, the worst thing that could happen in my life is that when I die with 80, 90, or 100 or 111, that's my goal now these days. But is that if I stand in front of God and He says, welcome, Philip, but you know what? This is not why I really kept you alive back then. I actually had a different plan. And I feel like this would be the worst thing to hear. And I was like, the only way I will make sure that I don't lose my path is if I stay in such a close union with God that He and He can guide me and He can lead me, and we are in that relationship together. And so that personal, intimate relationship with God became more important than my family, my health, my work, my success, or any of that, because I knew that if I lose that, I basically lose the path. Because just saying, "Oh, I want to do the right thing," there are a lot of people who want to do the right thing but have different opinions. So I want to stay close to God. And that was a long story, but that's basically how my motivation, and it actually led to me doing a master's in spiritual formation just for me. I wanted to study how do we have a history of 2,000 year Christian history and 5,000, 6,000 year Jewish history of people trying to live that spiritual life, that union with God. And there's so much we can learn.
I love that you bring that up, that idea of spiritual formation. Brian Zahn is a pastor here and an author in out of St. Joe's in Missouri. And he said, he's like, man, we just got a lot of people that are good at being Christians, but not really dedicated at becoming Christians. And I was like, man, that is a packed statement. And then I feel bad because I don't remember the guy's name, but I was on a call with this guy out of Florida, and he was actually used this analogy about what it means. It's becoming, like this, to become, to be spiritually formed, as a Christian, like, as Christ-like, is a mini Christ, right? Like the verbiage that we use, like it means something, like we're becoming like Jesus. I mean, and so he talked about this analogy of a peach tree, and I don't know if you've heard this, but he talks about, like, if I buy a peach tree and I plant it in my front yard, and it's just kind of this sapling, and I don't know anything about trees, 2 or 3 years in, if it hasn't produced peaches, I'm going to assume it's not a peach tree. So if I get a horticulturist out and they look at it like, no, that's a peach tree, you're good. And I'm like, but when's it going to produce peaches? It's like, well, it produces peaches when it produces peaches. Like, your soil's good, everything's good, it's growing, everything's right on track. And he's like, I have 2 choices. I can basically tear it out and start over and think there was something wrong with the tree and not trust the expert that says, hey, this thing will just produce fruit when it's supposed to produce fruit. Or he's like, what I think we tend to do in the church world is we go to Walmart and we buy peaches and we start duct taping them to the tree, and we're like, peach tree, right? We didn't produce the fruit. We just put the fruit on. And so, yes, it's a peach tree and it will produce fruit. But we accelerated that process through kind of behavioral modification. And so I think that's kind of the difference. And I think, I'll give you an example, like specifically, like one of the biggest things, like I was a male pastor, a week didn't go by that I'm not talking to somebody about their porn addiction, about their, like, just their lust and, inappropriate relationships and all of these things. And again, this isn't a knock. This is just everyone's doing the best they can with what they have. And a lot of the guidance that we'd be given is like, oh, well, you've got this great software that people can put on, like, you just, starve the sin and your spirit will grow. And I believe there's truth to that, but we're not necessarily getting to the root of consumption, right? You go back to the original sin, if you will, like the idea that something is so beautiful that I can't appreciate it. Something is so desirable that I can't just go, well, that's a fine looking tree. No, I need to consume it. I need to actually, like, not, this could break down really quick when we start talking about ingesting but the idea of, like, I need to own it. It needs to be a part of me. I need to put it, like, in my mouth. I need to digest it. It's mine now, versus just the ability to appreciate. And the idea of just helping, like, as I've kind of come to these revelations, if you will, is like, man, there's just through my own dark past, like, any inappropriate relationship I ever had was never about a physical act. It was always about something much deeper. It was about acceptance and fear of rejection and something that was missing. And so helping men kind of discover like, hey, how do you become whole? How do you not need to supplement or consume another person, someone else's beauty or identity in order to try to fill something that's missing in you? But often we're like, well, just, put the software on your phone, pray harder, join a men's group, and like, brother, you're going to get through it. Well, we're just taping a peach on a peach limb versus really helping that person discover like, hey, you know what? This is going to take as long as it takes. In the meantime, yes, by all means, set up some software, do these things, but let's do the deeper work of recognizing where's that wound? Where's that thing? Like that's the big piece for mysticism for me that sometimes we miss is language matters. And so we talk about like, hey, you're broken in need of a savior. I find myself not using that language anymore. And like you're wounded in need of healing. Because Jesus does both. Like Jesus saves, but he also heals. And I think in that the idea of woundedness, sometimes we wound ourselves. Sometimes it's generational wounds. Sometimes it's societal wounds. But at the end of the day, healing and doing the self work, which we're about to get into, like the spiritual practices that actually will allow that inward reflection to produce that healing, which then produces that fruit that we're talking about. Where you're not reacting in the same way that you used to react, is kind of the difference for me when I start thinking about like just mysticism. It's so fuzzy. Like, how do we put a little bit more concrete terms to it? It's really kind of that inward reflection of becoming, and it just takes as long as it takes. Like, you just can't force it. Like, it's not in your control. But the Spirit of God in you will produce a good fruit. But I don't even know if we have say in if we're a peach tree or a lemon tree or an orange tree. Like you're going to be you may be just as surprised as anybody else as to what God is going to produce in you and through you.
Yeah. So I think that's this non-dual tension that we can hold is that, work out your salvation with all your hands, but in the end it's a gift of God. So there's an active part in all of it, but in the end, if you look at your life and also what you're becoming, if you feel like this is just your great discipline or if this is just your great peaches that you bought, it's not enough. So this whole idea, where we would just want to microwave, so to speak, our perfection, rather than really knowing that this is a lifelong process, which is the beauty of it, which is basically our tradition. But especially, when the Reformation had, we stopped confession. We stopped actually in saying, we are broken and we sin, and basically we need to confess our way forward, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Now, I come from the holiness tradition, where I actually do believe, and that would be also another talk, to actually believe that we can come to a point where we are not driven through our brokenness or our woundedness, and our sinful desire to actually live a victorious life, to quote Joel Osteen here, that I really believe this, because God wants to make us new, but we should celebrate this journey of really becoming whole. And that has a lot to do with our motivation. Is our motivation to, am I afraid that, God is going to be mad, or I'm not going to make it to heaven if I stop looking at porn? Is this our motivation? Yes, guilt can bring you so far, but guilt sometimes is a good indicator, but it's bad motivator. Okay. So guilt can show you, maybe there is something wrong, but it will not motivate you really into changing and becoming who you want to become. So if this is your storyline, it's broken and you will not get out of it because your motivation is a false motivation. Now, if your motivation is a different view. So for example, when it came to porn, for me, a big breakthrough came when I understood the porn industry and realized, when guys or girls consume porn, what they are actually supporting. And it is everything I'm against. So when I realized this, is like almost my temptation went away, because And now I'm not saying, it's not nice to look at a nice woman. It always is. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you, basically, or you're not honest. But to understand, if you have looked behind the industry and feel like, if I'm all for heaven on earth, if I believe in a different world, if my citizenship is in a new kingdom, this has nothing to do with my kingdom. So I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's the same with, lying and cheating. I don't believe in a world of lying and cheating because I'm in a different kind of a kingdom. And so for me, the temptation is not lying or cheating, but it's really to say, how can we live and enact more the kingdom that we are part of?
That's good. So let's talk about like actual spiritual practices. And so I know the big ones in, like, when we're talking about like behaviors, things that like are going to bring you closer to God. I think the things that we often talk about in American culture is like, hey man, you got to be in your word, you got to be in your Bible. And I think there's absolutely a ton of truth to that. However, I think it's also important to recognize that, you talked about the Reformation. There's kind of this great divorce that happened when the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church split, and the Protestant Church got the Bible. So it's like, hey, you don't need us to read it to you anymore. You've got printing. Yep, go ham, folks. Like, enjoy. But within 150 years, like, everyone died off, and there wasn't anyone to necessarily teach the historical view of the Old Testament, like the Jewish traditions. There wasn't the actual historical practices of the traditions, the liturgy, the history. So the Catholic Church, like in the divorce, they get the history and the liturgy, and the Protestant Church gets the Bible. And so now you fast forward to today, it's, again, not a knock. People doing the absolutely best they can with the best of intentions, and God is still redeeming and doing wonderful things in and through all of that. However, I know that it's probably not a week goes by if you're listening or you're just scrolling through Twitter and you see clips of sermons and things that you're just like, that is not at all what that's about. Or that's a very spun or, reductive view of that text or that passage. So I think obviously, yes, pray. Yes, read your Bible. But what are some other things that you implement in your life that are spiritual practices that actually allow you to be transformed?
Yeah. So first of all, we have to realize that before the Reformation, people didn't have the Bible. To believe that you only can live a spiritual life by reading a Bible, 1,500 years after Christ, Christians actually did a pretty solid job, some, and not all of them. So the Reformation, there were a lot of different points that needed to be reformed as part of what was happening. Now, I would say as a pastor, and not everybody who's reading their Bible, if you don't have not been, I see that sometimes in the US. I think sometimes because you still have a more broader biblical worldview, understanding, heritage for people to read the Bible. If a German who has no background all of a sudden reads something, and they can come up with some weird stuff. I'm not allowed to cuss here, right? So there's some crazy stuff.
Just do it in German, no one will know.
And crazy Scheiße. They can come up with what they do with the Bible, and it stands. It is there, So so we all know that we need to interpret the Bible, and we need to work with the Bible, and that takes some effort and some discipline, and also it's not just like you just read 3 chapters a day to keep the devil away. I personally, think there's a great benefit at different stages for what you need. So if somebody has never read the Bible, to read through the Bible can be very helpful. But I normally tell them, you'll get stuck in Leviticus if you start, and then you don't know what to do. Now I studied theology. So theology is often engaging with your mind, the Bible, trying to really seek out what does the text, wrestling with the text. through your mind, through the intellect, and especially in the after the Reformation in the Lutheran, the evangelical kind of tradition, that has been more the focus, the scholarly way of understanding the text. Now, so when I was done with the Bible, with my theology, I wasn't done with my Bible. Please don't quote me on that one. But I was basically, I wanted something else, because I've studied, the Bible as a textbook, and I wanted to study it as a love letter. And that there is just a different way to engage. And there's a way, it has become more popular in the last years, called Lectio Divina, which basically we actually are praying the Bible more than studying it. It's not so much about how wide can we go, but how deep can we go. And it's almost like inviting God to really speak through the text to us on a way that the text sometimes doesn't even say it, because it's a more mystical experience in how we engage and how we are praying the text. So I believe they are. I look at it as like a buffet. There are many different ways on how to spiritually kind of engage, and there are different times you need different things. So for me, if you ask me personally, if we say, prayer, often in the Western world, we think of pietician prayer. So it's like me asking God stuff. Now, to be honest, that's just really 10% of prayer. If you look at the, even at how Jesus teaches it, it's like he says basically close your door, talk to God, but he already knows everything, so don't talk too much. And you're like, should I do? What should I do? And so there is a whole different tradition. Also and ways where, there are times and seasons where you need to really just pray and seek God with pietition. But in my life, centering prayer, so actually really quieting your mind and engaging in God's presence without your mind, has been a very helpful tradition and practice. Journaling, really praying through my pen, so to speak, and not just telling God all of this, but really reflecting on my life, on my experiencing, trying to listen how I'm experiencing the world, how I'm experiencing life, and have God ask me about it. So for me, I don't read 3 chapters a day. I might read a verse and really try to spend some time with it. Or I read some mystic. Now there are times I love to read a commentary, because I can geek out on stuff. But it's so much more. It's both and.
Yep, I love it. Obviously, Brian Zahn's been a big influence in a lot of my practices, and he has part of it, his morning prayer ritual that I've basically copied. Is he just calls it sitting with Jesus. And so it's this visualization of time where you there's, whether it's the couch, I generally have these 2 chairs, and it's a meditation of I'm sitting in one and Jesus would be sitting in the other, and we're not speaking. And there's something about that is beautiful, because essentially what you're saying is just being with you is enough. What you've done is enough. What I have is enough. Whatever my circumstances are is enough. I come asking nothing, but I'm just grateful to be able to come. And the beauty in that is much more often than not, Jesus doesn't speak either. But sometimes you're prompted and there's a revelation there. But more often than not, it's almost this affirmation of hey, you're okay too. You're after me, and that's enough. And I got everything else covered. And so that and there's an actual felt difference in my day, in my attitude, in my reaction to things, when I do that versus when I don't. And there's no in between. It's either almost like Zen-like, like nothing's going to break me down. Like everything is awesome, or like it's just another day. And it's all in the 20 minutes of just sitting with. So that pretty much puts us at time, Philip. So for those of you that have hung out with us this whole time, just the idea of being mystical, the idea that there's limits to just the understanding, the knowing, the systematic theology that is good that we can put in place. But there's just simply things that we limit ourselves to, that we just can't experience when we're only practicing inside of these pretty traditional Western models. And so the question for you to ponder this week is, what is a practice that I might experiment with over the next couple of weeks and just see what God might want to be doing? It can be something from as simple as just going, if you exercise outside and you go for walks or runs and you normally have these things in and you're listening to your podcast or your music, what would it look like to not? And to just, listen and see what God is doing through creation and nature. It could be meditation. It could be something as simple as thanking God for 3 things every morning and asking for nothing. There's all different kinds of things. You can Google it and it'll give you tons of different kind of mystical experiences that you can do that are maybe a little other than our traditional pray and read your verse of the day. And then from an action step, Philip, what would you suggest?
Well, I'm a big fan, like I said, about centering prayer. If you Google centering prayer, you actually find quite some teachings from some monks, Thomas Merton, Keating, where they explain actually the practice, and it's really about the practice of letting go of your thoughts, and that way actually being okay with just letting go, which is a deep practice of worries, of ambition, of the need to be heard, the need to be right, all these things that sometimes are driving us in a way that are not great. So I would say just Google centering prayer and try it out. I can only recommend it.
That is great. So we will leave you with this quote. You didn't even know this. You set me up perfectly. The spiritual journey is not about acquiring something outside of yourself. It is about opening yourself up to the divine presence that is already within you. Thomas Merton. So until next week, peace and love.
Peace.